And do you have your chat open on your end, Ryan?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Okay. How many people do you show?
We're showing 10 participants at this time.
Okay. I only show 5 on my screen, including me.
Yeah, you can actually change the up in the right-hand corner of the window. You can actually change the grid outline. If you click on the multi-grid, there's like 6 things, and then you can pull it down. There's like at the bottom, you can drag it down, and it'll increase the number of people you can see.
Okay. I'm still only showing 5 on my end. Oh, there's an arrow to the right. That's what that says. There we go. We got Derek. We got Bobby. We've got Ray Stedwell. We got Wesley.
Shannon. And all right. Do you want to explain the chat also, or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay, so for the folks already in the presentation, the Zoom meeting, there's a chat button. If you move your cursor down at the bottom of the screen, I know some of you may be on a phone, which you just tap, but on the computer, you would just move your cursor down at the bottom. There's a chat box. You just a button. You click on that, and a chat box will open up, and you can either send a message directly to everyone, or you can just send it to me, however you want to do it. And then I'm going to bring up these questions, and we'll try to fit them in as they pertain to what we're going over. Is that about right, BJ?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We do have a PowerPoint with an outline and subpoints to help kind of direct the evening. And we'll just go ahead and go down to the next slide. Figured to start with smokers just because to show how non-intimidating it is and how simple this can be, and start with something very, very simple. We've got some subpoints. These are our primary points, and then as we go through, there'll be subpoints on each of them, maybe even some photographs. Did you get the PowerPoint on your end, Ryan?
I did, yes, sir.
Okay. Did you see anything you wanted to add to it offhand?
No, it actually looks pretty good, pretty thorough.
Okay.
It's 7:06, so if you want to go ahead, we can proceed.
Okay. Our primary people to answer tonight are Ryan. We have Dana. Dana's had some surgery today on his ear, had some cancer removed, and he has a collar protecting his ear bumping anything. So if he looks a little strange, let me introduce Dana. Dana's been a friend since back in the mid-90s. He has been at our club several times and even been at B School with us. He is up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and last December we scheduled him to speak on identifying stress in the beehives. And of course, identifying also takes in what can we do about it and how can we benefit by being able to identify it ahead of time before it destroys the hive. So that's just to let you know that Dana has been a part of our club for many, many years, and to look forward to, it will probably almost positively be a Zoom meeting in October with Dana. So if you see a guy with a bandage on his left ear and a collar on his neck, that's Dana. We'll go on down to smokers. And your smoker, everybody always thinks that this is the simplest thing in the world. Anybody can start a fire, but starting a fire that smolders and doesn't burn and stays lit is a far different thing. My very good friend Randy Tudor, he related when he first started beekeeping, he would get his smoker out, he would light it, he would go put on his coveralls and gloves, and by that time the smoker was out, and he would go back and take his gloves off and relight the smoker and put his gloves back on, and again it would be out. And you know, this went on, so it took longer to get the smoker going and get his gear on than it did to actually take care of the bees. But we've got a picture coming up. Oh yeah, you can see that if you can read my writing. Coarse shavings are very easy to light. Newspaper tied in with coarse shavings is very, very hard not to light the smoker, but they burn fast. And so if you get a fire going and get some heat in there and ignite some things that are a little bit more durable, then you have a fire that when it does start to go out, you still have enough hot coals that you can throw in a handful of shavings or pine straw and immediately it's back to going again. The list there are things that I have put in, and those are hardwood pellets, pine straw, pithy wood and some bark in the center. But I regularly pick up a bag of sweet gum balls, hickory nuts, shells, pecan nuts and shells, bark. The compressed cotton is really the only one that you would light from the top. All of these others, you want the fire to start at the bottom and gradually add fuel to the top and build it. But the compressed cotton comes in tight cylinders about 2¼ inch diameter that you can actually light from the top. And because it's from the top, it just smolders. Lasts a long time. Anybody have any questions on your smoker and problems that you might have had? Or we've got a lot of mics muted, people wanting to just watch and listen. This may be a very fast meeting. This time of year, it's difficult to be real critical of the pattern because of the mites and the treatments until you get things taken care of and get the bees cycling their brood again. But when you have a bad pattern and you haven't treated for the mites, that's the first concern, is the mites and the viruses and the lack of nectar and pollen, low population, cold temperatures coming up in October would affect the pattern. Anybody have bad patterns in their bees? Anybody have bees crash from the mites?
I had a bad pattern.
Okay. Tell
I
us
think I had a
about
bad queen.
it. It's okay. When?
Well, it's my first time and I didn't know she was a bad queen. And her pattern was never really great. It was just so-so, and then I think she's not in there anymore. So
Okay.
I lost her.
Okay. Well, usually when you first get a package, the mites should be very, very low, and you can assume that it's not a mite problem with a bad pattern then. But if you don't have a lot of bees, if the bees drift, or if you don't feed well and get them off to a good start, you can have a very limited pattern. If your bees are crashing from mites, you treated too late or didn't treat at all, what you will often see is several frames, maybe 5, 6, 7 frames with scattered pupa, very, very little, if any, larvae, very little, if any, eggs, and a handful of bees. And you see the moths and the beetles start to come in and work on the frames. It's very common for that to happen to a few hives. A lot of my yards right now are 60 to 75 hives at a location, and And when I was medicating, this would happen to a couple of hives now and then. You don't want to stack a hive that's crashing from the mites. Think about it. If you have a hive that is overloaded with mites and they have pupa, those pupa are going to have mites sealed in with them. And you stack it on a hive, you've just introduced mites to a hive that you've already treated and you thought was cleaned up from the mites. So the best bet is to freeze it, do something to kill the mites and keep the moths out and the beetles out while you do that. And then you can come back and put it on the hive and let the bees increase their amount of brood. We've got Brent Hart on the line now too. Anybody have any questions or comments on patterns this time of year? And obviously the focus is on August, September. We should comment on genetics also. If you have carniolan bees, they have a tendency to stop laying whenever there's no nectar and pollen. So you could literally have 60, 80,000 bees in a hive and not have any eggs. And there was a time many years ago where I would add a nuke because I thought they were queenless, and they were not. But it was kind of terrifying to have a huge hive, high population, with no brood in August.
I got a question for all of the folks in the room. Have you seen any mites after treating? Are they continuing to see mites, or did the treatment work well? Is that okay to ask, BJ?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I'm watching the muted microphones and the faces to see if they're trying to talk.
Don't be shy. Everybody chip in.
My treatment's still underway. I have Apivar strips in. I put them in a little earlier than normal this year.
When did you put them in?
On Saturday, it'll be 4 weeks ago.
Okay. Apivar strips would be a very bad choice if someone hadn't treated, a month ago, and to treat now because they work so slowly. And it's very possible the bees would crash with the mites before the treatment really grabbed a hold.
Did I like a lie?
What did you try to say, Bobby?
I said I did an oxalic treatment in July after the flow.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know Stephen treated with Apigard in June, and he thought he wouldn't need to treat again in August, and he did a mite drop test and found mites in the hives of varying numbers, and realized that, the idea of June, we'll talk about it a little bit later. It's a little early, though, for your primary control of mites.
I treated with, as soon as I took honey off, I treated with Apigard and completed that treatment. But I plan on doing the Apivar strips later on, so just as a extra treatment, so they don't have die off in the winter.
So did you do any kind of a mite drop test after the Apigard?
I didn't do any scientific type of test, but I looked very closely at my bees and I did not see any mites. So, and I'm usually, during the height of the season, I can spot them pretty well. So I think it worked well this year, for me anyway. I did see one mite crawling around 2 weeks into the treatment, and in one hive and then several on the backs. But after I finished all of the treatments, then I haven't seen any since then.
We've got several people that have got their cameras turned off. They don't want to be seen, I guess. Derek, why don't you turn your camera on and talk to us?
He might not have brushed his hair, BJ.
This is true. It's important to get a good pattern going after you medicate. It just, you have to be patient sometimes to wait for that pattern to be generated after the mites have been eliminated.
I will say, just to kind of add into that, this last go round after the treatments, I noticed that several of my hives had ramped up production as I had expected. And, you know, there was still a couple lagging. So I kind of poured some syrup to them to give them a jump start.
As a beginner, I have a question.
Sure, Shannon.
Thank you. I was using the drone comb throughout the year, and I've taken it out now, but I didn't know if I took it out too soon, because when I did my last hive inspection on my other hive, or my other colony, they were still having drones. When is the normal time that you remove the drone comb for the fall and winter?
Usually when the nectar flow stops, unless they're overloaded with drone pattern, they're gonna eliminate their drones. Dana, do you have more of a precise answer on that?
Well, I live here in North Carolina, and I've already seen, I don't know whether you can see this thing I'm holding up, but I've collected a couple of drones that's out in the landing board. The bees just shoved out of the hive. So I went through my bees yesterday, and I didn't see very much in the way of drone brood.
But if they have a lot of drone pattern in their comb, the bees are more likely to keep on raising some drones. Is this what you see?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir.
As long as there's drone comb in the hive, the mites will settle in there and reproduce. So I would probably, if I had drone, or if I was trapping drone cells in my hives, I'd leave it in. And by the way, if you have the green drone comb, you can take that out, freeze it, put it back in, the bees will clean it up, and if they're still producing drones, the queen will lay in it.
Thank you.
Well, we'll step on down to the next screen.
I might make one other comment. I
Sure.
don't buy the green plastic drone cells. I just take a starter strip and let the bees build comb naturally. I cut the comb out and stick it in my wax melter, and I get some wax in addition to killing the mites.
I asked Jennifer Berry once if we could just break the caps on the sealed pupa of the drone frames, and the mites have the ability to go back and mate again and go through the whole cycle repeating it. And so the freezing is a very, very important part of that drone comb. And with 2 hives, Shannon, you could do it with just 1 frame. You're running double brood chamber hives with brood in both boxes. Is this correct, Shannon?
Yes, it was until I lost the queen on the one.
Okay. So to have a drone frame in there all the time is not much of a sacrifice, but if you're running a single brood chamber hive, to have the 1 drone frame in there all the time reduces your brood volume.
Okay.
And in that case, you could rotate it from one to the other. You could have one frame in the freezer and one frame in a hive with 2 hives, and take a frame out of one, put it in the one that you're removing the drone frame from, and pull the frame out of the freezer and put the other frame in the freezer.
Give him a break.
So, but after you treat for the mites, I would say you're probably very beneficial to have as much worker brood as possible to help you get your population up and strong for the winter.
That makes sense. Thank you.
BJ, can I ask one question?
Sure, Stephen.
Mites, are they only in the drone cells?
The mites have been trained by Mother Nature to go to the drones because they are in the sealed pupa stage a few days longer, and their percentages of success in reproduction are higher. I think, if I remember right, your numbers are up in the area of 70, maybe 80% success rate in reproduction in drone cells, compared to about 55% in the worker cells. And that's kind of off the top of my head and rough, so it may not be exactly right. But those extra few days, and what hits us so hard is when they quit raising drones and the bees go to the workers, even with that lower success rate, if you have 2 or 3 female mites in there laying eggs, your population of mites is still going to increase at a very steep scale.
Okay.
I was going to throw in a comment if I can.
Sure.
I kind of, because I know that, just like you said, that drones prefer, varroas prefer drones because of their cycle. I actually kind of battle drones all year, all season long, and I'll cut 75% of my drones out on a regular basis. That's just kind of my strategy to minimize or mitigate the mite load in my bees, because I know, most of those drones, you can see the actual pupa and different things like that have mites on them, whether they're fully developed or partially developed. But so I know that it's keeping a lot of mite load out of my hives by doing that. I don't have any of the drone green comb, but my bees are notorious for building their own around the top of the frame. So I just usually cut that out, like I said, about 75% of it, and I do leave enough drones to mate other bees in the area. Just a strategy I've done.
Typically at our workshops, which we haven't had this year, we demonstrate the cappings scratcher and scooping right in underneath the head of the drones in the pupa stage when they've reached the white body and the purple eye stage, and lift them. And if you have a big solid area of drones, you can lift out 20 plus in one lift, and their whole abdomen is exposed as white, and the mature mites on them are extremely visible. This is a very, very easy technique. It's not as precise as doing a mite drop test, and we've demonstrated that typically in our summer workshop, which we didn't have this year either. Fall evaluations, because of you have to take into consideration the mites and the treatments and the stress loads of the treatments and how they affect the mites, the populations. It's very difficult to be too critical of the queen until you get back on a scale of her building back into a good pattern. Sometimes this SMR, suppressive mite resistance, that is a genetic trait, the bees can sense that the mites are reproducing, and they will abort those cells and help control the mites. And they'll only abort the ones that are reproducing. I guess all of the mites do not reproduce when they get sealed up in those cells. You know, the bad evaluation can be our fault. Bad pattern, you know, being too critical of the queen. It could be something that we have done or haven't done in the hive. Something so simple as moving too many empty frames to the middle, putting foundation in the middle this time of the year. The bees are basically in August wanting to slow down their brood. And if we're trying to expand the cluster, we're working against what they want to do. And this is assuming they're not honey bound where they need more space. But you have to be able to evaluate and act upon what you see as you're evaluating. Anybody ever have an infertile queen? Ryan, you're muted. There you
Yes,
go.
I've had many infertile queens over the years. Been 18 years of beekeeping, you're going to run into a few, or at least they were fertile at one time and then became infertile.
In the old days, if the weather was wrong when she was supposed to be flying to mate and there were bees out in the woods, it was a case of she would lay a perfect pattern, just as slick as can be, in many frames, but they would all be drones in the worker cells. Shannon, you might be new enough that you wouldn't recognize it as a drone if it was in a worker cell. Is this possible?
Yeah, that's possible.
What you look for if you can't see it projecting up as being a taller cell, when you can get it to where you have the purple eye stage with the white body, the size of the eyes tell you if it's a drone or not. So you don't have to wait until it hatches. To have that advantage of realizing your problem a week earlier is very beneficial. So what would you do with an infertile queen? How would you know whether you could fix it or not fix it? How would you minimize your loss and maximize your strength?
Does this go to anybody?
Anybody, everybody.
I actually had this happen very recently. It was right before I started treating at the beginning of August. And one of my most prolific hives and good honey producer, I went into it, and the queen looked like she was healthy. All of her legs, wings looked good, but she was spraying. I'm talking spraying eggs in the cells, and that's a key indicator that she no longer has enough sperm to fertilize those eggs. And obviously, I immediately took her out and didn't put her in a retirement home. And I took another queen and out of one of my nucleus colonies where I raise queens, and put one in there in a cage. So the hive took to her. 4 days later, she was released and laying eggs. So, but if I hadn't have caught that, it could have turned into a situation where the bees or the queen laying all those eggs, if they all became drone, they can ruin your comb. It could just decimate the hive going into winter.
What do you mean by spraying?
Where she had this particular queen had probably, I'm telling you, 5, 6, 7 eggs per cell. I mean, that's why she was just spraying eggs in the bottom of the cells, because she knew there was a problem and she wasn't able to fertilize them. It's my theory. So the queens will just lay multiple eggs, and that's a key indicator a lot of times when you see that they no longer have enough sperm to fertilize the eggs, because many of you might not know, a queen, they have a spermatheca that nourishes the sperm after they mate, and for their entire life. But once they run out of sperm, they can no longer fertilize those eggs. you know, as you know, workers are fertilized and drones are unfertilized. So all of those would become drones, and you don't want that.
Also, the bees are very sensitive to the pheromones of infertile eggs, and they will often clean out infertile eggs, causing a bad pattern. Did you see sprayed eggs in drone queen cups, worker cells, or just
They were actually they were everywhere. They were in drone cells, they were in worker cells. This was one of the textbook non-fertile queen situations. So yeah, that's what I would call it. There was eggs everywhere. I mean, she had just been on several different frames just spraying eggs into the cells because she couldn't keep up anymore.
Dana, that's probably a stress issue, but the question is it possible for the workers to start laying at the same time with that queen because of the stress load?
I've seen so many situations with queens, and I've seen a hive almost full of drones that lane workers took over, and of course the result there is the hive's going to die out because no worker bees are being replaced. But I kind of try to check my hives as often as possible. Now that I've retired, I can really take care of my bees, where when I was running a lot of hives, and anybody has a lot of hives just uses a spot check now and then to check their bees. But I'm not too kind to a queen that's not doing well. I don't know how many of you feel this way, but I replace her as quickly as I possibly can.
I was actually just discussing this with BJ the other day about my dad also keeps bees, and I had gone over to his yard early in the spring, and the productivity of the hive is that each queen, they just weren't producing enough workers, and I told my dad, I said I would have probably requeened these a long time ago, because I like you, Dana. I'm not too friendly to a queen that's not doing her job. I'll replace her pretty quickly. I guess one of the comments I made to BJ the other day was, you know, a bad queen will cost you more than the queen costs, because you're going to have problems with the hive. You're going to continually have to be taking from another hive. When you do that, you're reducing population of that hive, honey production, and if it's a bad queen, it's not going to survive or be productive anyway.
So Ryan, what is your strategy or criteria for knowing whether to stack the hive and give up on it or to requeen it?
I would say at the time of the year is a key indicator on whether or not it's recoverable, or if it's a lost cause that needs to be combined. At this point in time in the year, unless you're raising your own, I mean, you're probably, and if it's a weak hive, I would just combine them. I wouldn't try to get a queen and put in there at this point, because if they're that far behind, you're better off just to combine and split them out in the spring. You know, if it was like I said, it was early August and you had queens available, then I wouldn't have done it at that point in time, unless the hive just didn't have the number of bees that you would need for survival.
It's very difficult when you have mites to requeen, weaken the hive, and get control of the mites and expect them to rebound quickly and go into winter.
And here's the other key, is just like I said a minute ago, if you're taking from your other healthy hives in order to fix a problem hive, then you're weakening that hive going into winter too. So that has to be a consideration in itself.
My friend Billy always said that a strong hive will outproduce 2 so-so or weak hives. And that's both in honey and or population. So the idea of letting that strong hive become double the strength that it is at that time is going to produce a better hive to split and have than trying to repair one that's in trouble. If you have 10 or 15 hives and you can steal 4 to 5 frames of brood and a super of bees to fix a hive after the mites are cleared up, then you can have the ability to rebound. But anything that's less than about 5 frames of brood right now is in trouble and may not be able to get up to strength and survive the winter. Any comments on queens and questions?
All I can say is the hive is really the queen. If you don't have a good queen, you've got a bad hive.
So the question then is, how do you define a good queen? What are the traits? And my traits that I want in a good queen might be totally different than what someone else wants. Stephen, what do you look for? You've kept bees for 8 years.
Well, I'm just trying to make sure they have a good pattern laying and try to keep as much frame, much brood in the bottom as I can.
One of my criteria used to be she is resistant to swarming and durable. I can expect her to last a year or two. Of course, those are ideals. You can't always achieve them, but if you have them as ideals and work toward them, they're good goals to have in a queen. I want queens that are gentle. I went in and released 4 queens Sunday. No smoker, no veil, no gloves. I did work careful, but I didn't take very long doing it. Actually, I released 6. 2 at the shop in Ball Ground and 4 in Milton.
AJ, if I can just interrupt, I started my fall preparation about a month ago, and I was up to about 20 hives. Right now I've got 14. I just took the queens that weren't doing well, just killed them and put their brood boxes and everything else on top of the 14 hives I have currently, and I've got my hives in a goldenrod section where they're bringing in honey and so forth. And I don't think it's the number of hives that I have. I want hives that really build up, and every one of the 14 that I've got right now is really heavy. So, and I just finished checking my bees yesterday because I wanted to get it done before this bad wet weather came in. And I've never left a bee yard where I felt happier with what I was looking at.
So your hives, Dana, how many of them are double brood chambers with a super, so on?
I've got them right now. They're 3 deep high.
3 brood chambers, no super?
3 brood chambers, a lot of brood, and a lot of winter stores.
So you might have brood in 1.5 of those brood boxes?
I checked yesterday, and all I can tell you is I was surprised about how full the frames were of brood. I mean, brood on frames completely, both in the bottom, and I moved brood down to the bottom box, I might add. The box on top has got honey stores.
And they'll increase
when you
the
want to
brood in
count
the middle.
frames, yeah, to count frames, I'd say there's, in each one of those hives, there's probably 7, 8, 9 frames of brood.
Dana, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Sure.
I just was wondering, what was your indicator, since we're talking about evaluations? What was your indicator?
I can't hear too well.
to stack those hives. Why did you stack those hives? You said you went from 20 to 14.
What was
Why
what
did
was
I?
the criteria in
Because
evaluating?
I know I'm going to lose 50% of my bees if I don't. And I'd rather have very strong hives going into the winter. And I've already ordered packages for next year because I am expecting some loss. But I have learned that if you got hives going into winter that don't have the winter stores, they almost all collapse at some point during the winter. If they're, it's just like a cat or a dog, you feed them. With bees, I move my bees to an area where they've got a chance to store some food. If you're having your bees in a fixed bee yard, you have to look it out 2 miles around your hive to see what's available for them. And usually in an urban setting like here in Raleigh, I can have, and I do have bees here at my house, got 4 hives. I have to feed them, where if I've got bees out in the country on the farm where I've got them, the bees here in Raleigh, I have to feed to keep them alive. The bees out in the country really are putting away a lot of honey stores. I'll take some supers off of them and put them on the hives here in Raleigh.
Let me give another little bit of information about Dana. Dana is, are you actually 80 or just over or just under?
I'm coming up on 82.
82, okay. Dana, at about 55, he recovered from cancer and he decided to leave the tech school that he was directing, had been a teacher prior, and go into commercial beekeeping. And he kept upwards of 600 hives. He was very active in Ohio State and the Columbus area. He built the bee club in the Columbus area up to 600 members.
I didn't build it. It built itself with all the new people that came in 2001, 2002. You remember those days. We used to have very small club meetings, and we had Central Ohio Beekeepers had the advantage of being having classes on the Ohio State University campus on the farm. And I don't remember what year it was, but sometime in early 2000s, before the CCD situation, we could take a classroom that handled about 50 people maximum, and we advertised in the newspaper and stuff for class, and lo and behold, we was sitting in the classroom, and pretty soon the classroom had people standing around the outside walls, and we had to say, whoa, we've got to do another bee class, or at least take care of the people that were in the overflow group. So I think right now in Columbus, they are running about 4 bee schools, trying to do on Saturday, trying to do on Wednesday nights, maybe Tuesday nights. And the bee schools usually run 2-hour sessions if they're during the week for about 5 weeks. So it makes a 10-hour class. And they have a bee yard located on the Ohio State campus, which they use for hands-on introduction to packages, and both an advanced group and a beginning group. It's been 5 years since I've been in the Columbus area, so I've retired here to North Carolina.
Okay, we're gonna drop on down. We've already kind of covered this one about the laying works, to fix or not to fix. One of my sayings is, in the springtime, the bees will forgive you for almost any mistake you make. But after the 1st of August, you make a mistake, you've probably killed the hive. Anybody have any questions on laying workers or fixing hives with laying workers? Comments?
I would just recommend not trying to requeen a laying worker hive. That's the advantage of having 2 hives. You could take that laying worker hive, put it on your very good hive earlier in the year. There's 2 bee seasons, by the way. You mentioned BJ. There's a time when the bees are building up and then a time when the bees are starting to decline in population. It's pretty easy to do it when bees are building up, but if you have a laying worker, set that hive on top of a good strong hive, go back in 2 weeks, split that hive, and you're back to 2 colonies, introduce a new queen, and you're off and going.
One of the things that I'm sure Dana probably does as well as I, and probably Ryan, is to break the caps of those drone cells in an infertile situation so that they abort and clean out the drones and refill it with fertile eggs. But when there's brood in that brood chamber that you stack on top, it seems like the queen moves up into it much more quickly than if there's no brood.
And that's true.
Otherwise, that 2-week time, they would think you were exaggerating. But knowing the difference, I understand that. Do you do the newspaper method, Dana?
No,
I don't either. I get people ask me that all the time. I tell them I
don't.
just shake the bees out on the ground and stack it.
I don't even look for the bad queen sometimes.
But do
I
you
know
actually-
that people get shocked at that, but time's money. And the bees take care of that bad queen in no time at all. I mean,
So do you actually shake the bees out first, Dana, or do you put
no, I just take the bees, set them right on top. Sometimes I'll use a queen excluder because if the queen, I don't want her going down below, but for the most part, I just set the hive. In other words, if you got a double deep hive and you've got a single deep that's got problems, there's no problem if the hive you're putting the lane worker hive with, if it is a strong hive, they'll take care of any problems that are existing in that hive. Same way with wax moth. If you've got a hive that's got some wax moth in it, it's queenless, you'd be surprised how fast the bees in a strong hive will clean that situation up.
Have you ever had a colony like that you've stacked actually go in and kill the good queen?
Not that I'm aware of. And by the way, it's not unusual sometimes to find 2 queens in a hive. You know, the bees are in the process of superseding their old queen. And you'll find 2 queens. The old queen just disappears pretty quickly, but the easiest way to know that is when you've got a queen that's marked and then you find a queen in the hive that's not marked.
Like you said, there's 2 seasons to beekeeping, and when they're building up, you know, if I have a laying worker situation, I'll do like BJ. Well, either way, I've always shake the bees out. I'll walk it probably 100 yards from bee yard and shake them all out, and then I go and either stack it on another hive or put it back where it was early in the spring. And the laying workers normally don't make it back, so you can requeen it.
Yeah, when you've got 600 colonies of bees, it takes a little time to walk over and shake those bees out. It's just a whole lot easier to set them on top of a good strong hive and say to heck with it.
Yeah, I never have gotten that big. I'm just a hobbyist, so I have a little extra time to fool with it.
Right.
We're going to move on down. Any more comments?
Now, when you say stacking, are you talking about stacking the brood box on top of another brood box on the weak hive?
Just setting it right on top.
Okay.
Bait stations, beetles, taking care of beetles. You've got to understand that beetles are not the problem in a beehive, unless you're in Florida where you could literally have hundreds, maybe even thousands of beetles in the hive. The problem is the reproduction of the beetles. And so if you're treating the beetle larvae down in the ground, they've probably already reproduced and destroyed your hive. My strategy has always been to control the adults and minimize the ability for the beetles to take over a hive. But we've got the oils, we've got beetle barns, we've got the Swiffer sheets, and Stephen was talking to me this week, and he was saying his oil traps weren't working. And when he opened 2 or 3 particular hives out of the 14, 18 hives, the beetles just went everywhere. And I told him, I said, the question is, why are the oil stations not working? And we talked about low density of bees, weak hives, small amount of brood, the question of the bees needing to be 3 weeks old to control the beetles. Most of us know that the bees will corral the beetles when that's a healthy hive, and when we open the lid, we basically open the gate and the beetles run. If you're able to keep the bee density a lot higher, then the bees are able to do a much better job of containing and corralling and controlling the beetles. These are 2 things that I have. This beetle gel, this is one of the older models of the beetle gel. A guy up in Tennessee came up with this idea. You see the little arms that clip it onto a top bar, and the top one you can see that it has a lid that opens with multiple compartments. You can put oils, you can put bait, you can do different things. I can't use oil in my hives because of moving them and the tilting them back and moving them with a hand truck. I use the beetle barns, which is the next picture. No, it's not. Where are the beetle barns?
We can take a picture of the beetle barns, unless it's on that big one.
Thought we did.
No. There, no.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. We missed getting a picture of the beetle barn. I can hold one up and show you. A beetle barn is a clamshell that's about 2.5, 3-inch square, has a little compartment inside. I modify it, put in some 1/8-inch hardware cloth and make my own bait. I keep it below the excluder at the corner of the hive in the high population warm time of the year, and typically move it to the center above the cluster in the winter. The idea being that the beetles run up and down the corners. That's their interstate highway. They don't like the high density area that the bees are controlling. And when they come to a corner, they're going to turn and go left or right, which is up or down. And if you have too many supers on and you have a lot of beetles, they're going to be up in the top all the time. And the people that put the beetle barn or their beetle control up on the inner cover, it may be that there are a lot of beetles and bees up there, but the density of the bees is not there, and the control just does not work as well up there because the bees are not harassing the beetles. I know moving bees to cotton years ago, I would shake a super over the telescopic cover and maybe kill 80 to 100 beetles. And I had to keep extra supers on them so that they wouldn't run out of space and I wouldn't get in trouble with them. But the beetle barns are pretty effective with the bait, the insecticide inside, and the bees can't get into it. And literally you can clean out the openings where the beetles can get in and the bees can't. And the next day you don't have any beetles. Any questions on, how did we jump to that?
I agree that the beetle barns are very effective. I used to be overrun with beetles for some reason in my hives, and since using the beetle barns and continuing to clean out the propolized openings every time I go in the hive, they're very effective. They've taken care of the population of beetles.
There is another reason I put it underneath the excluder. That is that it stays in the hive when I'm pulling supers to harvest the honey. Underneath the excluder, it's pretty well fixed that it's not going to leave when the super does. Anybody ever use the Swiffer sheets?
Yes. Actually, I use that. They're like, I think they're called handy wipes, but they're kind of like a Swiffer.
Yeah, there is a name for them. I don't remember.
Yeah, it's like a commercial. That's what they use in restaurants. It's a table wipe, and I cut them into little squares. They're quite effective.
Do they eliminate the beetles or just reduce them?
They do a pretty good job eliminating the beetles too. They get their legs and stuff. They like to burrow into them, and they chew on them, which pulls the fibers out of the Swiffers or the cleaning restaurant cleaning rags, and then their legs get caught in them, so they get trapped. I've only seen, and for some reason, bees are pretty slick. I've only seen 2 or 3 bees caught in them, but I've caught, just experimenting with different things I hear, I've caught hundreds of the beetles in those wipes since that I use.
Yeah, forgive me for calling them Swiffer sheets. That's not the right word.
Where would you put those in the hive?
I just lay them right on top of the top bars.
Okay.
Center, edge, corner.
Do what?
Center, edge, corner.
I kind of move them around. Give the beetles some variety.
How big do you use? I mean, obviously you don't want it to the size of the super. Ryan, you muted.
I apologize. I cut it into probably a 3 by 3 inch square, and just throw it in there. Like I said, I move it around. I use it sometimes if I see a problem in a hive and the beetle population's gone, I'll use that in the beetle barn.
I'm surprised the bees don't propolis them.
The bees don't mess with them. I honestly, like I said, I've only had like 3 bees that have gotten their legs caught in the windings of the wipes, but I think they're afraid they're like a web, so they kind of stay away.
Okay.
Are they dry? Are they dry when you put them in, or do you have a chemical in them?
No, you don't put anything in there with them. Actually, they're just these sheets that you cut into little squares. If I'd have thought I have some out in the garage, I could run and go get some. But
I think I may.
but basically, you don't put anything on them. There's no chemical. There's no treatment. It's just they like to burrow in them, and when they do, it makes those fibers poof up, and then they get their leg caught, and it kills them. Pretty effective.
Bee Velcro. This is like bee Velcro, I guess.
It's beetle Velcro, yes.
Yeah, it really is. So we've covered pretty well that stronger is better if you want to survive the winter. To be free of mites and wear out your bees that were affected by the viruses and generate a whole new population. We've talked about that at previous meetings. And that's what we're trying to do in September is have the bees working so hard that they wear every bee out that was in there when the mites were present, so that we eliminate the viruses since they do not transfer from bee to bee. If that does not happen, then we have to understand emergency care to survive the winter. Ryan, your window's lit up, but you're muted.
Oh, I wasn't saying anything. That was my children in the background. I apologize.
Oh.
I will say that I did find the name of them. They're called Brawny Dynamax. They're I'm sorry, I can't speak tonight. Brawny, just like the paper towel, Dynamax. And basically they come in a red and white box, and they're used in commercial restaurants. Sorry to jump back to that, but I was looking it up.
Well, we need to touch for a minute on this emergency care concept and understand when it would be something of importance. If you don't get good control of your mites, or if you control your mites 100% and you still have the bees that were there when the mites were and they have the viruses, it's very possible that when it gets cold in December and then warms back up and your bees fly, that your population shrinks. And when that happens, the tight cluster in the cold nights is going to be about an inch away from the food that's on the outside of the cluster. They cannot go to frame feeders, they cannot go to entrance feeders, and it's slow starvation because the hours of warmth in the daytime and the ability to relocate food is just something that can't happen. And so that's the point where if you have to feed them to keep food in their stomachs and help them to have food at the edge of the cluster, that the jar on top of the cluster is critical care, emergency care to help that cluster to get through the winter. No matter how big or strong the hive is, if they don't have food right at the edge of the very tight cluster on the cold nights, they get into trouble pretty quick. Any questions, comments? When things go wrong in your hives, one of the comments talking to a guy last week, this was one of the things that he saw in assisting a new beekeeper, that all of a sudden something's wrong in the hive and it's already to the disaster point. So you get into the routine that, well, nothing's really changing, and so I'm not going to check my bees as often, or life gets in the way and you go 3 or 4 weeks without checking your bees. So not checking enough is one of the things that can cause things to go wrong in your hive. And that involves the inability to evaluate past today. And it's a very, very common that in beekeeping, it's easy to evaluate up to today, but it's very difficult to get past today. And a couple of years ago, this was the solution that I had. The black is duct tape. So the idea of duct taping a Ziploc bag down on the top of the inner cover, index cards, make your notes right there when you're in the hive, and anticipate 2 weeks into the future. And if you do this long enough, you will get to the point that you understand the bees well enough that your accuracy will become very good. And you will recognize that a problem is going to happen 2 weeks before it does. The reason you want 2 weeks is it might rain on Saturday, and Saturday is your day to take care of bees. And so it might be 2 weeks before you get in. But this is by far the simplest hands-on. And I know everybody doesn't deal in large number of hives, but when I leave one hive and go to the next one, my mind has to have a clear slate. And if I don't make a note on my tape on that hive, or do something, stand up a brick or put a stick on it, I might not remember which hive had the problem or what the problem was. So to develop your own system is a good way to help you learn that, evaluating into the future. It will definitely make you a much, much better beekeeper if you can develop that skill. Well, that's the program, folks. I don't have a clock to know what time it is. It's what?
8:07.
8:07. So the hour program and a few minutes for wrap up. Anything we need to add to it for a final wrap up for tonight?
We've got an applause icon. We've got an applause icon from Ray down there, so he liked it.
Ray took a trip with his daughter down to Peru, maybe a year and a half ago. And they did some hiking up to some high elevation points. And I have a feeling that photo may be from that hiking trip. I was supposed to have to go check and feed his bees in October because he was going to go to base camp on Everest. But due to shoulder injury and COVID and complications, that's not for this year. Ray's a good friend.
And it's a big disappointment.
There you
That
go.
picture was from, is in Peru, and it was at about a little over 15,000 feet.
What was the 4,000 that was on it? Was that meters?
That's meters.
Oh, okay. I saw the number and I didn't even dawn on me that it would be meters.
So BJ, do you want to open it up and see if anybody's got any questions about their specific issues in their hives?
Sure. How do I do that?
I just did, I guess, with your agreement. Don't be
If anybody
afraid.
has any questions, what we want you to do is announce your name, tell how many hives you have, how long you've been beekeeping, and then tell us what your problem is. I guess we've solved them all, Ryan. Dana, we thank you for being with us. It's been a joy to have you and help to introduce you for the next meeting. You're muted, Dana. Dana. Dana has had several websites over the years. And he told me the other day that he was going to get gobeekeeping.com back up. Ryan commented that, 15 years ago when he was starting beekeeping, he learned every question and every quiz that was on the gobeekeeping.com.
I used to go on Dana's website all the time and quiz myself. So
Well,
thank you, Dana.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's been 5 years since I've even touched the site. So nothing has changed, but that's going to change because I've been learning cascading styles, and the site is going to have a whole new, really different look.
Well, good.
Yeah.
You get it updated, let me know. I'll definitely link it to our website also.
Yeah. Well, it's going to take me a little while. I'm in the process of learning not only Zoom now, but cascading style sheets are a little bit different in controlling a web page. And once I got a handle on it, I'll really have a site that will be somewhat interactive.
Some of you might possess the book Beekeeping 101, and Dana is the author. It is out of print now at this time. Several years ago at my class I teach in Jasper in January, I told them that that would be my recommendation for the book, and they could find it online if they wanted. And lo and behold, some of them went on to Amazon or wherever you go to buy books, and it was listed for as much as $175, Dana.
Wow. When a book goes out of print, I don't know how many of you collect bee stuff, but at one time I had a very large bee collection that I gave to Joe Lackshaw before I left Columbus. And the price on bee books, original first editions or signed editions or anything like that, prices out of it. Just, I couldn't afford to buy it myself.
I think I have a copy there, one of the original copies that you signed. So
Yeah, you'll have to find somebody pretty dumb to pay $150 for it, though.
It's not for sale.
I sold one recently that was a signed copy, and I had to look and make sure it didn't have the personal note that you'd written to me in the cover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's out there. I published it from 2008 up to last year. I really stopped when Brushy Mountain folded because Brushy Mountain and Kelly's handled a lot of them, and Rossman did too for a while. But there's a lot of good beginning beekeeping books out there, and mine was somewhat dated. And rather than put all this new stuff in it, I just decided to let it go.
The unique thing about Dana's book was that he had experience in Georgia and Ohio and wintering in Georgia, making packages, raising queens, and he could explain the differences. And many of your websites and books are people in the north, and if you try and follow their method of beekeeping, it's not the way to do it in Georgia.
And North Carolina is a little bit different than Georgia too, let me tell you.
I'm sure your goldenrods was pretty heavy bloom, what, 2 weeks ago?
No, it started some early goldenrod maybe 3 weeks ago. Now it's really in bloom.
Yeah.
It's really,
Ours just opened up this week. Goldenrod is one of these things that starts farther north and works its way south. South of Atlanta last week, there were a lot of buds, but there was very little bloom in those mass areas of plants.
Yeah,
BJ,
go ahead, Bubba.
BJ, I have a question regarding some of these fall plants that are, it looks like the goldenrod's starting to perk up a bit around here now, but I paid real close attention to the comings and goings of the bees earlier this week. And then I was taking a look at the pollen that they're storing currently. And I've got 3 colors that are coming in right now. One is orange, the color of Cheetos, or like a cheese puff orange color. And then I've got a light yellow. And then the other pollen is a gray. And I haven't been successful yet in figuring out what plants are contributing these 3 major colors of pollen that I have coming in. Do you have any idea?
I have to throw in here, Bobby, the Cheeto cheese color is probably from the elementary school.
Okay, that's true. Could very well be it. But it literally is. It looks like Cheetos. It's so funny. But thank you in advance if you could shed any light on that. I mean, I've seen the purple ironweed out there blooming, and I don't know if bees hit ironweed.
they do.
And do we know what color pollen that is?
There are reference books that give you the pollen colors and so forth.
I haven't found one that references the plants around here, though.
Well, North Carolina did one, and the North Carolina State Beekeepers did a book back in 1991. Steve Bambera, you might use that name on a search, a Google search. It primarily covers plants of North Carolina. It's a very good one. If you have a microscope, and I do, I use microscopes, and you can take samples of pollen and put it onto a slide and do a pretty good job of identifying exactly what it is. I mean, every pollen, every plant that produces pollen has a different shaped pollen for the most part, just like leaves on a tree. You can tell what a tree is by looking at the leaf. You can look at the pollen grains and really identify, even in honey, there's going to be pollen grains in honey. You can tell where that honey came from.
One of the plants in the Midwest was smartweed in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
We have smartweed here in North Georgia, but it's very minimal. But it put off a white pollen.
Gosh, I don't even know what smartweed looks like. I'll have to Google that.
Yeah, It's,
Would some of that gray pollen Bobby has be coming from sourwood, BJ?
no, sourwood's all over. If they're bringing the pollen in now. And you know, with subdivisions and ornamentals, you just don't know what might be there. You're not talking limited to the native plants and the wild plants. You have to take into consideration these other things. The key would be to find a plant that the bees are just covering up.
I'll be sure to follow them when I'm out there this weekend.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? I thank you guys for joining in. Hopefully we've had information that you have enjoyed and have enjoyed the active discussion. Hopefully you have enjoyed meeting Dana, and we've given him a good introduction that you will want to tell your friends that are beekeepers to tune in next month for our Thursday night, the third Thursday of the month. And we'll have a program on identifying stress in the beehives.
I've mentioned to BJ, hey, there's stress on us as well.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Thank you much. We've stopped the recording, and we will close it down for the night. Just one last request. If anybody has any comments or questions, now is the time.
Thank you.
Thank each of you for participating. And
thank
even
you
those
for
people
inviting me.
that, yeah, even those people that wouldn't let us see their faces, like Derek Mackey and Wesley. And there were several people that aren't members of our club that I forwarded the invitation to. So we had some of those people on. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you,
Have a
BJ.
good evening.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
BJ.
Bye.
Deep out up in Blue Ridge.
Yes.
Stop it. Stop
Oh, you want to do it?
it. What to do?
I was going to hit yes.
Okay, I'm signing off, BJ.
Okay, we are too.